right, so hi everyone once again. Thanks again for joining us. For those of you who just joined, welcome to our show. What we'll be discussing today is how to avoid the crucial UX portfolio mistakes when transitioning into the field. So we have invited an awesome guest who has lots of experience in this field, who will share many insights about this journey with all of you today and answer your questions. We'll introduce our wonderful guest in just a few minutes. For those of us joining us for the first time, my name is Michael, and I'm the founder of a company called BeginX. What it is, it's a part-time UX career accelerator based on real mission-driven client projects that helps people who know UX basics transition into the field in one of the most effective and efficient ways and without quitting their jobs. And I don't mean this to brag again or anything like that, but just to give you a bit of a background for credibility purposes. The company is headquartered in NYC, and we have run many virtual cohorts, so quite a few by now, and helped around like 160 people or so get hired into UX roles. We'll tell you a bit more about our virtual program and also make a special announcements closer to the end of the event. And of course, that part is completely optional for you. All right, so here are some companies that the grads are hired by. So we've basically seen lots of people go through this entire UX career transition journey. Awesome. So now let's get to the most fun part and introduce our awesome guest. And then our guest will go over a few principles and a few of those crucial mistakes that you want to avoid. And then after that, we'll jump into the interview. And we'll also be taking some questions from you guys as we go along, and then at the end as well to make it, again, as interactive as possible. So Frankie, great to have you here. Thanks for joining us again. Really excited to have the discussion with you. So would you like to briefly introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. Super excited to be here. So short introduction on myself is I'm a senior UX designer. I've been in the industry about 5 years now. And I'm super passionate about breaking the barrier of entry for beginner UXers, as I like to call it. And for me, when that work kind of in that passion has kind of spiraled into content creation on the side, which has been a fun one for me. So when I'm not doing my 9 to 5, I'm, doing content creation to help really break the barrier of entry and share tips and tricks of like what I wish I knew when I first started. So everything that I'll be sharing tonight has been, things that I've learned along my way and what I've learned from talking to mentees. So very excited just to get into it and, share my mistakes.
Awesome. Thank you, Frankie. Great to have you here. And by the way, I highly recommend for everyone to sign up to Frankie's newsletter. She does run a newsletter, shares lots of valuable stuff for free, right? So you definitely should check that out. So Frankie,
Thank
please.
you. Love a little plug. Can definitely share that later. Yes, give me 1 second. I will go into present mode and share my screen.
Yeah, and I see lots of action in the chat, which is amazing. Keep introducing. If anyone just joined us, we basically asked everyone to introduce themselves in the chat and to let us know where you're based and what is your background or like what area you're transitioning from. And feel free to share more fun facts about yourself as well. And again, you're welcome to share your LinkedIn. I see lots of people doing that. Wonderful. And Frankie, just let me know whenever you're ready. Amazing.
Can you all see my screen?
Yep. Awesome.
Perfect.
All right. So I'm going to turn off my camera for now.
All righty. We good to go?
Yep.
Okay. I'll take that as a yes. So hi, everyone again. So as Michael said, we're going to be talking about top portfolio mistakes, putting this into quotes because, I feel like that word is the wrong word there, but the mistakes to avoid when transitioning into UX. So this is going to be focused on specifically for those of you who are breaking into the industry and are new to the UX space and trying to learn, what is supposed to be put into that first portfolio. So As I mentioned, I'm going to skip over my intro, but as I mentioned, I'm a content creator on the side. The reason I want to call this out is I do think it will be helpful for all of you. It's really sharing the things that, I wish I knew when I was in your position. And so definitely feel free to connect with me there. It's a great place if you have questions later on that you forget about, you can, feel free to connect there. I'll answer them. But I'm going to move forward into the actual talk since it's really why you're all here. So we'll jump right in. So the first mistake, and again, air quotes here, that I want to cover is this one over here of forgetting to make your title obvious. So when I talk about this, I'm talking about on your landing page, when you land onto a portfolio, you ultimately usually see this kind of image that I'm about to depict. And if this is you, I apologize. I'm not trying to call any of you out. We'll learn through this discussion why it may not be the best option. But for example, when I see multiple portfolios, because I have seen many in my days, I love looking at them and doing reviews. I've noticed usually this image. It's a white background with usually your name in big, large letters. Then it'll be a sentence or two that describes kind of, what you're passionate about and what your role is. And so the reason I call this out is that usually you put your role into that kind of sentence. And so it's usually, UX designer who's passionate about XYZ, fill in the blank. And although that, it's great, it is there, it's right front and center. If we think about who we're designing our case studies for and our portfolios for, it's someone who probably doesn't have time. One of the first things that I was told when I was making my portfolio is the fact that hiring managers usually spend 10 to 60 seconds, yes, seconds, 10 to 60 seconds on a portfolio. So we're talking under a minute to really decide whether or not this is something to move forward with. And the reason I'm calling this out now is the fact that I really want to make sure that within really 2 to 3 seconds, then, because we are dealing with such a short period of time, that ultimately, they can automatically be like, oh, okay, this person is a designer. Oh, this person's a researcher, and can decide from then and there whether or not they want to move forward. And so this is something that you really want to think through from a hierarchy standpoint to make sure that it stands out. So now that we know why it's a mistake, let's talk about how we can fix this. I'm not just going to be like, oh, this is wrong. No, we're here to learn. We're here to see how we can update. So there's not one right answer. But one of the ways that you can update is thinking about how do you really make the title stand out better. So some options can be, and again, this is going to be what works better for you, what you think stylistically, stands out better. You can, use a different style font. So if your name and the sentence, for example, are in very bold fonts, maybe think about using, a really thin font weight to put your role in or your title in, because this way it will stand out differently. And the contrast level will be super high. Or the opposite, if you have really thin fonts, perfect opportunity to use a bolder font, and ultimately the contrast level will be great and you can see it. Or potentially you can think about using, an underline, italics, or something like that. The one thing I do want to call out here for a second, and I don't want to go too deep into it, but I don't recommend using color as the sole option and the sole idea of how to make your title stand out. The reason being is accessibility. And again, this can be a whole other talk, but with this one, you want to make sure that anything you put, everyone will be able to see. And so you want to make sure you're thinking about that contrast level. So if you use a light color or a color they can't see, you kind of are not helping yourself. So if you really want to use the color route, I really highly recommend using a second indicator as well. That way you do cover your bases. The other thing I do want to call out is a lot of you are maybe thinking, well, I'm new to the industry. I don't have a role yet. I haven't worked in it yet. Don't worry. This also aligns with you as well. What I recommend doing is using the title that you're aiming for or the one that you really want to be at. So, if you're aiming to get a researcher role, perfect. UX researcher, done and done. There you go. Whereas if it's designer, perfect. You can just kind of choose and pick. So don't worry about that. But yeah, just go for the one you're aiming for. Alrighty, we're gonna go to mistake number 2. So number 2 is not showing personal branding or your personal brand. This is one that is near and dear to my heart. If you've heard me before, you've seen my stuff. I'm always talking about personal branding. So apologies, but I do think it's one that's super, super important. And the reason being is literally for this example here. So let's think about you're going to the grocery store. Let's totally forget about portfolios for a second. You're at the store and you want to buy some soap. I don't know, something random, we'll go with it. And you go to the shelf and you see all of these items on the shelf. You're going to see multiple different brands. And in this case, let's say that every single brand is basically bright colors with bright patterns, very in your face. And then let's say you have one individual brand compared to the rest that are going to be, muted colors with very, very simplistic designs. Now, I have the chat open, so I'm curious. Let's make this interactive. Which of you think that within, the next hour after I leave, or maybe even the next 5 minutes that I leave, because, our brains are, going, losing more, but, realistically, which one of those do you think you're going to remember more? Would you remember the one that's, one of the random brands of the bright colored standout patterns and the specific brand name, or are you going to remember the more simplistic design? I'll give you a minute if you want to write it in the chat. Don't hesitate. Don't be shy. I see one answer. We got one brave soul. All right. All right, I see some answers now. The one that, perfect, most of you are saying is the simplistic design. And that's exactly what I would expect. The reason being is that even though probably off the bat, you may think that the one that stands out, that is bright and colored stand out. But in this example, it's the one that's more simplistic. The reason being is it's less about the design and less about kind of the vibrancy of it. It's more about what is different. What is the one that actually, is completely different and seems like a different piece and stands out, is going to be the one that probably will be remembered. So why am I bringing up soap when we're talking about portfolios? The reason being is it's a perfect way to discuss how showing your personal brand and showing that identity and making it something that's unique and that stands out is going to be something that's super, super important. Because at the end of the day, in the case of my example, you want to basically be the simplistic design. You want to be the one that someone who walks away will remember your design, and ultimately, be the one that they continuously think about. So, as I said before, I'm not just going to call out the mistake here and the fact of how a lot of times this branding is forgotten because it's usually just simple white backgrounds with, a simple font, and that's about it. There's not much to it. So instead, we're going to discuss how you can ultimately fix this and, add more personality to this, because really that's what we're doing here by adding a personal brand. So I'm going to give you a fun activity that I would love to see later on if you want to message me and let me know who of you have tried this. But one of my favorite activities that I've done is basically this, is send out an email, a message, whatever you're comfortable with, to some friends and family or anyone who really knows you is really the goal. You need them to really understand who you are. And ask them to just send you some random words that represent you. That's all I need you to do. Just ask for random words and it'll all make sense. Then once you've done this from a couple people, I definitely recommend asking at least like 2 to 3, get a good list going. And once you have that, then compile it as one list and put it to the side for the second. And then what I want you to do is go to Google and search the psychology of colors. So what this is going to do is it's going to bring you a list of websites that any of the top few will work. I've been on all of them. They're all great. And what it will do is it will show you a list of what the colors mean, their personality traits, what they relate to, the different industries that it correlates to. And so it's going to give you all these different pieces about what this color is actually associated with. And the reason why this is really interesting when it comes to your personal brand is what I then want you to do is take the list of all the words that describe you from your friends and family or whoever and connect the dots. Look for the words that go one-to-one with what those colors are. So that way, what you're doing is you're creating a brand that actually physically represents you. Because this way you're picking the color and being like, oh, this color, meant XYZ, which related to the word that my friend mentioned. And so it's a really fun way to tie in who you are without being worried about, oh, what color should I pick? And from there, I would encourage you to think about, 1 to 2 colors, maybe 3, and a font or 2. Really, you can stick with one font. But the goal is really to find a few colors that will look good together and represent you. So if you get a lot of words and a lot of colors, I'd recommend, figuring out how to really tone it down and find a palette that works for you and that, is going to work well together. So one thing that you can do is potentially take one or two of the colors that you like from the list of the words that they mean, and then put them into a color palette picker. One that I like to use is Colors or Coolers. I'm not actually sure how to pronounce it. There's plenty out there, and you can just pick the palette that way. But that can be a talk for a whole other day. So I'm going to stop there on this mistake. But it's one that I highly, really recommend you do. It's a fun exercise. It'll allow you to really, add some fun pieces into your portfolio, which will ultimately just bring back that personality, which I think is usually what's usually missed in the junior portfolios that I see all the time. But that's ultimately, realistically, how I got to, this color palette over here, and what you're seeing today with this presentation and all the materials that I do. We're going to jump to mistake number 3, and this is forgetting the importance of URLs. So what this really means is that any of you, I'm sure, have seen this. When you go to a website builder, you have 2 options. You have the option to, excuse me, you have the option to go with the free option and just use the domain name that they provide you, which would be, let's say, Frankie Kastenbaum at, Wix.com or Squarespace.com, fill in the hosting site name. Or you have the option to do a paid domain name, and one that can really be anything you want. And the reason why this is really important is a few different pieces. Because I would really recommend that you go the paid route. The reason being is 3. There's 3 things here about this. The first one is that it goes back to what we were just talking about number 2, about your personal brand. You want to, again, be thinking about how to tie everything together. And, if it's just your name, there's more of a chance that someone will remember it than if it's at your name at hostsite.com/ et cetera, et cetera. And so for that purpose and that purpose only, it's a great option for why you should be, putting that, choosing the paid option. Because realistically, and I forgot to mention this, realistically, when I say, do the paid option, I'm probably talking a couple cents to a couple dollars. Although there is a wide range for a domain name, they really tend to not be that expensive. And so it is something that I would recommend that you put forth. The second reason for why this is important is that it's showing that you're willing to put the weight behind this decision. It's showing that you're willing to actually put your money where your mouth is, if, going with that expression, and, being confident that this is what you want to do. And then lastly, like I was talking about, it really ties in the whole package together, as in the package of all of your deliverables. So your portfolio, your cover letters, because yes, you should be writing those, as well as your resume and any other things that you're going to be packaging up in kind of that application. So these are just, it's another mistake, but it's one that I think really would help you. It's a small one, but adding your URL and paying for it, I think, will really pay off and have a high benefit. So next we get to mistake number 4. So this is a fun one. This is not thinking about the overall flow of the portfolio or the case study, but generally the whole thing. So this is an important one, and this is where I want to stop and talk about how really your portfolio at the end of the day should be your most important case study. So the reason I say this is that realistically, your portfolio is the same as any UX project you're ever going to work on, in the sense of the mentality you should have behind it. Because if we think about it, at the end of the day, just like a UX project, you actually know who your end users are. Realistically, the goal of a portfolio is to get you hired, is to get you, to show off your skill sets. And so that your reader, your user, is going to be someone who's of the hiring manager position of some sort. And so you can design the portfolio for that. And so it's important to think about that overall flow and think about how you want to lay out kind of their path to make sure that you're helping them. Because realistically, you want to, make sure that you're showing the skill sets of being a UX designer through this portfolio as well. So let me give you another example of, why this can be a mistake and how this plays out as a mistake. So for example, I'm on a case study and I've scrolled through, I've taken my time, I've gone through and seen the pieces that I need, and I get to the bottom of the project. Now, due to the trend that's going on, and it's fine, but realistically, more often than not always, but more often than not, the navigation will be gone. I'll no longer have that option to go in and, click on back to projects and go back and choose the one I want, or I won't have the option even to go to the About Me page. And this is important because I'm kind of lost in the sense of there's no way back. Technically, yes, there is a scroll bar. I can scroll all the way back to the top of the page, but realistically, that is time consuming. And if we go back to what I said earlier, we really have 10 to 60 seconds here. So let's say under a minute to have someone go through this. So if they have to scroll back up, that's wasted time where they need to scroll, which really is not helping you. It's a disadvantage at the end of the day. So one thing that you can do instead to try and help yourself is think through the next step that you'd want them to take when they get to the bottom of the case study. So for example, one way you can do this is you can create a button or like an ad that will basically lead you to your next project. So this way, first off, you're showing your skill sets, you're showing that you're thinking about the overall flow, as well as you're helping the user be like, oh, okay, this is what I should see next. I don't have to think about it. And so it's less effort on the user, which as a UX designer is always great. As well as you're saving yourself time to help them actually see more of your work and your skill sets and overall see who you are as a candidate. So next time you're creating your portfolio, I definitely recommend you think about how the user is going to move through to make sure that the hiring manager can see the most of what you want them to see. So number 5, we got 2 more left. So number 5, the 5th mistake is using blurry or small images. So this is a fun one. I see this honestly very often. There's 2 pieces to this one. So images are great. Don't get me wrong. Please still definitely use images in your case studies. They are vital. But at the same time, they can also kind of hurt you. So why are images great? Well, images are really helpful because what they ultimately do is they break up big blocks of text. And they especially will help someone if you're, scanning this like our user probably is, they'll allow them to kind of read some of the information at an easier pace and see things differently. The problem being with this is that if your images are really small or even blurry, that defeats the purpose. They won't be able to actually see all those details and see all that information and be able to actually learn what you're basically wanting them to see. And so when you have small images, it ultimately ends up just being scroll space because they're not actually going to look at it because they can't learn anything from it because it's just too small to see all of the good juicy stuff. So ultimately what ends up happening is most likely someone will just scroll right past it and then it's just wasted time again. And that's basically, our theme here. So on the other side of this though is blurry images. Again, same idea also to some extent of they're wasted space if they don't actually help because they're too blurry. But there's another really big piece here. The other side of this is that showing a blurry image potentially shows that you don't know about quality or that you may potentially hand off bad quality images to your client or to your end goal or your end user, I should say. And basically what this means is that the person who's hiring you may be afraid that ultimately you're going to hand off deliverables not of the right quality. And so again, it's just the idea of you always want to put your best foot forward and make sure that ultimately, you're just trying to help yourself and use these images to an advantage more than anything. Lastly, number 6 is presenting your case studies as a checklist of deliverables. This is a huge one, but the reason why I left it at the end, excuse me, is the fact that it's really a culmination of a lot of what we've been discussing today. So I'm curious from all of you in the audience, let's make this interactive again. How many of you have heard the word or the term checklist designer? I'll keep the chat up for a few seconds and see if any of you have heard of this term. One brave soul so far. All right, few yeses, few nos. All righty, perfect. So let me describe this and explain what this is. Wow, there's a lot of no's actually. Okay, that's interesting. So what is a checklist designer? A checklist designer is really someone who creates their portfolio as a checklist. Is basically saying that everything in it is just listing the deliverable one after the next. And it basically just becomes, as the name says, a checklist. Ultimately, what it does is, there we go. Ultimately, what it really becomes is you're just listing off everything that you did, and you're not really usually explaining the whys. And there's two problems here. One is the fact that the whys are honestly one of the most important pieces of a case study. And the other fact is that you're creating a case study that's super, super lengthy because you're not paying attention to the fact that ultimately you have two different stories at play here. And I'm gonna, try and keep this one a little short because I know I can go into a lot of detail for this one. But basically, when it comes to your case study versus and being a checklist designer, like I said, there's two different stories here. You have the story of your play-by-play. So think about like a replay in sports. You want to physically tell every single thing that happened without forgetting any detail. That one is going to be super important. You want to make sure, that you're following all the steps when you're completing the process. The other story is going to be that of your case study. And this is going to be the one that's on your portfolio and the one that's going to be a little more high level and that doesn't include every single possible deliverable. The reason for this is because, again, our hiring managers do not have the time. They don't want to sift through a case study that feels like it's never ending and one that's just going to keep going on and gives every single piece and that only just talks about kind of what you did and not the whys. Because like I said before, the whys are the piece that are vital. So how do we fix this? So one of my ways to fix this is through a method that I call the UX portfolio sandwich model. And although it is a mouthful, it will make sense in 2 seconds. So I'm going to just talk about this one really quickly. But basically, as with any sandwich, you have 2 slices of bread and a filling. I'm hoping that that's not a shock to any of you here. But basically, the reason I bring this up is that every single deliverable in your case studies should be related to an individual sandwich. What I mean by this is the fact that you should have 3 different phases to every single deliverable that you want to mention on your case study. Again, not every single one you did, just the one that you're putting on your case study. And so what those should do and what those should be are the first layer, the first slice of bread is going to be your introduction. It's going to be, we spoke to 9 users and ultimately that led us to create a persona. Then you're filling the meat and the bones of the sandwich are going to be the actual visual deliverable. This can either be the same one that you created, screenshotted, put it in, or it can be a kind of a broken down version of one that you make specifically for your case study. Either is great, totally up to you. There's no right or wrong there. And then the last piece. This is the one that's extremely, extremely important and the one that usually is forgotten and the one that relates back to this idea of this checklist designer and the case studies of as checklists and how we got to this methodology. So this last bit, the last slice of bread, the last piece in the deliverable sandwich should be the main takeaways and the main reasonings why you need someone to understand about this step. Basically, what it means is that should be the piece of information that they learn to understand how this step in the process ultimately helps you get to the final solution. It's really the why behind what you did or the learnings. It'll depend on the case. It will depend on, the step in the process that you're at. But ultimately, what this really does is it removes this checklist because this methodology allows you to ask certain questions that will focus on figuring out which of these deliverables to put into the case study, as well as by doing that last step of the piece, by adding in the summaries and the key takeaways, what it does is it transitions you very smoothly into your next deliverable. And so it creates more of a story rather than just a checklist of individual deliverables that just goes deliverable, deliverable, deliverable. And so ultimately, you're just sandwiching it nice together, hence the name, and really creating a more elevated case study by removing this checklist and creating more of a narrative. But that was a mouthful. So if you have questions on that, definitely let me know and I can give you more information about the sandwich model. But with that being said, I'm going to be cognizant of our time. And so I just want to do a quick little summary of all of the different mistakes that we discussed today. So as you all saw, we went through 6 different ones. We talked about forgetting to make your title obvious, the idea of helping your user figure out what type of role you're aiming for very quickly. We also talked about not showing a personal brand. So figuring out how to really stand out on the shelf, if we go back to that soap analogy. We also mentioned forgetting the importance of URLs, making sure that you're looking professional and putting your best foot forward in that sense. Also talked about the overall flow and making sure that you're actually thinking about that. So showing off that you understand information architecture and the layout of a project and a website. And then the last two being the blurry and small images. Again, this idea of best foot forward and helping your user. And then the last one of presenting your case studies as a checklist of deliverables. So making sure that you're really bringing in that narrative more than anything, and elevating it that way. So with that being said, I'm going to stop there. I threw a lot of information at you, but hopefully we can get into some more of this in the questions. But I just want to say thank you to everyone. I hope this was super helpful. And again, feel free to connect with me. I'll share any of the connected resources that I mentioned.
Thank you, Frankie. That was awesome.
Thank you. I tried to move quick enough. Hopefully we're good.
That was great. It was great. So for everyone in the audience, I'd love for you guys to just briefly let us know what was your biggest takeaway. Just share that in the chat so far. And we'll continue to the interview and to the discussion in a second. So feel free to share your biggest insight so far or biggest mistake that maybe you haven't been aware of. So feel free to share that in the chat. Meanwhile, what I also wanted to emphasize, so we're going to jump into actual discussion. If you have a question, please use the Q&A tab. So this way you can also upvote others' questions, and we make sure to address the most popular ones that many people are interested in. And ideally, please try to upvote others' questions as well. So review those. You should have access to all of that. And just a reminder, we'll make a special announcement about the program we're running closer to the end of the event, and we'll also share the career transition roadmap summary handout. So stick around if you would like to get that. All right, so I see some takeaways here. All right, so quite a few things. Amazing, yes.
I love it all.
Yeah, definitely. This definitely share some insights, right? So because you want this to, this will help you actually remember all this stuff, right? So it's that's crucial. Active listening, active participation. Right, awesome. And this will also help others learn because they'll see your takeaways, you can see theirs, etc. So just share, exchange. All right, awesome. So let's jump into the discussion. So if you remember that career transition roadmap, so we'll focus on that asset creation phase, right? Portfolio specifically, right? Portfolio mistakes, portfolio best practices, case studies as well, right? So basically we have quite a few questions that I'd love to ask Frankie, and basically explore this whole area of UX portfolios. I'm sure you guys have tons of questions, right? So usually everyone does. So again, just use the Q&A tab and feel free to share those in that Q&A tab. And we'll be, as we go through these questions and through the discussion, we'll also take some questions from the audience, and then we'll do more of that at the end as well. So Frankie, if you could, I don't know if it's a tricky question, I know maybe, but if you could have maybe 3 more mistakes, what would you add?
Getting attacked by Post-its. Definitely a UX designer over here. As I try and drink my water. 3 more mistakes. Okay, let's see. I've lost my notes, which is great. But my 3 more mistakes, and I can definitely send out links afterwards because I do have 2 articles on this that I wrote. But 3 other mistakes would be, let's see, not showing enough about yourself. So we talked about your personal brand, but there's the other side of it where that's all good and well, and that's very important, like I just mentioned. But there's the other piece about the about me section where a lot of times it feels kind of blah, and I mean this nicely. But I do think that like it's really good to learn more about who you are, your passions, how kind of your past skills will also help you. So don't be afraid to kind of add some information there. Other ones would be, um, let's see, I had a whole list in my head and I've forgotten all of them. But basically kind of a similar piece, but also going back to kind of the checklist, but the other piece being just making it extremely, extremely long. I have seen a lot of case studies that just are never ending. So I really highly recommend that you think about the length, because at the end of the day, it's kind of that Goldilocks scenario, and you really do kind of want to find that just right piece that does give enough of the information, and gets you to the, the final solution, but that doesn't lose your audience, because again, you have no time. So one more, let's see, what can I come up with? Another one would be, I guess not having enough information. Being honest, like that's another one that I've seen. I've seen both ends. I've seen ones that are completely just never ending. And then I've also seen it where it's just, here's the final solution, go have fun, go run with it. Whereas I said before, the big piece is I want to know the whys. I want to know how you think. So if I just see your final solution, that doesn't get me that. And so I would say that's the other big piece is like, again, that Goldilocks scenario, but that's another one is just don't give me just the images, the final solutions. Give me your thought process, give me the hows, give me the whys.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, this is great. And I've also noticed a lot of people make the mistake of kind of missing who they are designing their portfolio for. So in your opinion, who should you be designing your portfolio for?
So I like to say there's two personas to a portfolio. I am clearly a UX designer. I, use these terms all the time about all different things. But I generally think that, you should be designing for two types of readers. You have the one that I think we're really just discussing, the one who's your hiring manager, the one who doesn't have time. So that's going to be someone that you really want to make sure you're designing for scannability, for ease of use, and really help them move through things quickly, and get through things at a high level and get enough information that way. But then I do also think that you have people who are your more in-depth readers. So those are going to be the ones who actually do want those details. They actually do want to spend the time going through and learning about really every single step that you did. Again, not every step that you physically did as the play-by-play, but every step that you put on your portfolio. And so that's why I do think it's important to think about how to design for both, making sure that you have like the scannability aspect, but that you do have that depth, because there are those people that want that.
Yeah, yeah, and you also want to remember, right? Just to add to that, that basically hiring manager and recruiters, right, are your target users, right? So you definitely have to keep that in mind when designing. And then talking about their needs, right? So can you maybe talk a bit more about the needs of your target portfolio user that you're designing for, and how do you actually identify those needs?
Sure. I think I started talking about this a little bit before, but I would say is like definitely think about it like a UX project. Think about, like you just said, like you want to think about their needs, their goals, their frustrations. So, understanding what a hiring manager, what a recruiter is kind of doing and what they're doing, especially when it comes to looking at a portfolio. So you want to think about, the time that they have, how many that they're probably looking at maybe at once or within a short period of time. So you really want to kind of get inside the heads of these recruiters and hiring managers and think through, ultimately, what's going to help them, because that's what we do as UX designers, right? We're just helping our user. So I would think about, speed. It's kind of the theme here, but think about how can you help them get through something quickly? How can you help them get to the next project? How can you help them learn really who you are and what you're about? It's, this idea of putting things front and center, not hiding anything, and doing it that way so that you're really designing for their needs. And the way to find those is, figure, maybe befriend some recruiters, do some Google searches, or just think about kind of, what it is that they're looking for from that perspective, in the sense of, you've heard it all the time. They want to see your process. They want to learn who you are. They want to see your good culture fit, things like that. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And it's so basically it's just crucial to keep that in mind, right? So that
Exactly.
who's your user is, it's not just a portfolio that, it's your portfolio, right? your marketing asset and you're attracting those employers with that portfolio, right? So it's crucial to address like their needs and like what they're looking for, so you actually have some success.
Exactly.
What do you think? So coming back to, if we like reverse the mistakes maybe, and talk about best practices, what do you think are the top 5 things that make an effective UX portfolio that employers really like, in your opinion?
Let's see. So
The top
I think
3 is okay too.
let's see. Let's get to 3 or 4. We'll see where we can get to. I think number 1 is keeping me engaged. These days we have 0 attention spans. That's no surprise. We're worse than goldfish now. So I think the idea of like, how do you keep someone engaged is a big piece. Like, what's going to keep me wanting to see more? Number 1. Number 2 is kind of connects with that, but I always think it's fun when there's like the piece of delight. It's probably something you may have heard about before, but specifically, I like it when I see like a small micro interaction that actually worked really well. And the reason I call this out by saying that it worked really well is I've also seen it the other way, where they're just everywhere and it's overwhelming and it's not actually helping. But, very few small ones I think are really nice. I think another few pieces that are really nice, another one is if you are more on the design side, so you're coming from maybe a different type of design background, if you're more like illustrative, let's say, it is nice to see some of those in your actual portfolio. Make that as part of your branding. It's a great way to pull in your past careers. It's a great way to show who you are. So I think that's a really fun one. That was 3 or 4. I lost track. I think I need one more.
3. I think 3.
Let's see. Can I come up with one more? One more being, so what are great things? We talked about it a little bit, but story is a huge, huge piece. How do you create a story through the narrative of these case studies? I can't stress that one enough. So I'm going to double up on that one.
Yeah, so that counts for 4 and 5, right?
Perfect.
Yeah, we actually did a whole event about storytelling in your portfolio and your case studies. I think Mika, if you can find the link, she should be able to post a link to that as well if you want to take a look later. Not now. So, all right. How about portfolio homepage, right? Maybe any additional pitfalls to avoid that you can think of? Maybe any challenges that you've noticed?
I'm going to say it. I may get some pushback on this one, and I apologize again if you do this. I'm sorry. But it again goes back to this idea of personal branding and standing out. But I have seen it way too often. I have seen that little waving hi emoji. And it's everywhere. The reason I'm bringing it up and why I think it's a pitfall is literally the fact of everyone is doing this. Everyone has the white background, the waving emoji. Thank you. I appreciate the laughs in the audience. Don't take it personally if this is you. But I think it's not helping you. I think it's just creating more of a you in the masses, rather than, this is something about you. And so I think that's a really big one. Maybe choose a different emoji. How about that? If you really want to put one. But so that's number 1. Number 2 is the sentence. So I mentioned before that usually it's kind of the name and then a little sentence. It's, I'm a UX designer, passionate about XYZ. We didn't really get into this in the talk before, but I think this is another pitfall. Specifically in the sense that they're always repetitive. It's usually I'm a UX designer, passionate about, creating a more empathetic world. I'm passionate about, solving problems, kind of the generic ones. And so again, if this is you, I apologize, but I only bring this up as a way to say, hey, look, like think about what makes you stand out. What is the reason why you are different than the candidate next to you and what's going to maybe make you the better option potentially for the role that you're going for. So I would say it's like definitely like try and think about like what's going to be different to put up there so that again it stands out. It's going back to the soap metaphor, what's going to be eye-catching and attention grabbing.
Awesome. So and I like this question. So Josh wrote a question about one of your mistakes. Actually, I want to quickly take this and then also take another one about home pages. So he's asking, would you recommend making a lot of smaller sandwiches or one big sandwich for each case study?
Great question. So yes, definitely lots of little sandwiches. The idea is that every single deliverable that you're putting on there, again, not every one you've done, but just the ones that you're putting on, each one of those should be an individual sandwich. So for example, let's just take a persona deliverable. So if we break down the sandwich, what it's going to do is that you're going to have your first slice of bread, your filling, and your bottom slice of bread. That first slice of bread for our persona example, and bear with me, I'm making this up on the fly, so the information in terms of the details may be a little off. So please, give me a grain of salt here. But basically the idea being that the introduction could be something like, for our set of research, we ended up interviewing, 9 individuals. And through that, we ended up creating a persona named Susie. That there is going to be your introduction, short and sweet, but it's setting you up for this sandwich. And it's ultimately just specifically going to be that first slice of bread. Then you're going to get to the meat of the bones of the sandwich, and that'll be the visual of your persona. So, drag and drop or create a new one, like I said. And then you'll get to the last slice of bread, which will be those main takeaways and kind of the high learnings that you want, or high lesson. What's the phrase? The key takeaways and the lessons you want me to learn from a high level. And so the idea being is the second you finish that sandwich by, summarizing and sandwiching off that deliverable, you'll then transition your way into your next sandwich. So the idea is you're basically stacking sandwich on top of sandwich on top of sandwich until you basically get to your last one and you're satisfied with all of the pieces that you've added. So yeah, definitely, the more, I don't want to say the more sandwiches the better, but definitely do several sandwiches, not just one. Hope that helps,
Awesome.
John.
Awesome. I love all the sandwich insights.
Hope I'm not making anyone super hungry. Apologies. I know it's dinner time.
All right, and so coming back to home pages, so Alina has another question here. How much of personal stuff should be in that about section? What is appropriate?
I hate how I'm going to say this, but it's the classic answer. It depends. There's no perfect answer. There's no perfect, here you go, this is what you need. And I think it should be different and will be different for everyone. I think what's important to mention there is, and to make sure that you have, is think about whether you're a career transitioner or maybe you're coming from school and you studied something different. Whatever it is, whichever kind of career path you've taken, like think about what you've done in the past, whether it's internships, whether it's past roles. Again, it doesn't matter. Think about those and how those will relate to UX and what you're trying to do. And think about how those are going to give you maybe an upper hand, or give you kind of a unique spin on why you'd be a good UX designer. As well as I'd also recommend, like, if you have like an interesting backstory of how you got to UX, that's a great little place to put that. You want to just give a little bit of insights about what you've done, who you are, what makes you different, without going on for forever. I would maybe say give or take, and again, it really depends, but maybe do it so it's like 2 scrolls max on a full width. I feel like that's a good kind of length. But again, it's going to depend kind of on your history and what you want to put there. But I think those are some of the big pieces to think about.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Frankie. With regards to the structure of your portfolio, right? Basically, it's information architecture. Any mistakes, any additional mistakes maybe you want to point out related to that specifically?
In terms of information architecture, personally, and I know that there's disagreements out there, so obviously, figure out which way you want to go. But I think it's important to have your resume on your portfolio. And the reason I bring this up towards your question, Michael, about information architecture is I think it's good to have it as part of the nav bar. Because it's one of those things that someone does need, especially if you're trying to apply for a job. So if you hide it on the About Me page, you have to go through several clicks, you have to waste the time. Whereas if it's on the nav right off the bat, they can go to it. So I think that's one thing that I don't see it that often. But I do know that there's, some discussions on maybe don't do it. But personally, I'm of the belief that it should be there. As well as another thing that I've noticed is for those who are transitioning, especially from a different design career, there's always the question of how do I handle my past projects that are not UX projects? And I bring this up with information architecture because I think some of the ways to handle this is to think about how you can break up the pages. So I do think it is important to show some of that other work. I think it's a great way to show that you're more than just, the box UX designer. It shows you that you have these other skill sets, and there are ways that you can connect the dots and kind of show more of who you are and your personality. And so I would recommend thinking about how to make that a different page rather than throwing it all together just on the project page. So it's this idea of thinking about small bits of information at once, because again, our user, if we go back to what we've said in these questions that we were talking about of, they don't have a lot of time. We want to think about our users' needs. And so if we do it in a way that's digestible and small and we split it up, it'll be much easier for them. So I'd say that's another big one with like IA and like thinking how to break it up.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I just also want to highlight that it's crucial, like as Frank emphasized already, to basically have that structure very clear, very well organized, because it basically like this is another UX project, right? So this really showcases like how good of a designer or information architect or UX professional basically you are. All right, so Annalise, and by the way, if I mispronounce anyone's name, sorry about that. It's obviously not intentional. Annalise is asking, what platform do you recommend to use for creating a portfolio in terms of ease of use, cost, and functionality? Mine is currently hosted on Notion, and I think it's hurting my chances of getting hired.
Here's something interesting. I've been hearing a lot of people going to Notion for their portfolio. So I'm intrigued to see how that's hurting you. I don't know. Mine's not there. I've only seen a few, so I don't know, but I've been hearing it, so I'm curious. But I love this question, and I will try not to go on a rant. So Michael, pull me back because I can talk about this for hours. Excuse me. So again, it's a hard question to answer. The reason being is it's really going to depend kind of what your goal is in terms of who you are as a designer, I almost want to say. And the reason I bring this up is even though a lot of us here want to be probably a lot of you, I'm assuming, are more going towards like a generalist UX designer, and the word designer is there. The reason I'm saying like it kind of depends on your role as a designer is it'll depend on how much customization you want to do from a design perspective, and versus how much you want as a template. And the reason I bring this up is because a lot of the website builders and the hosting sites, I've kind of split them down into two different categories. There's the ones that are very customizable, allow you to do kind of anything and everything that you want. But obviously they're a higher lift, higher effort, more time consuming. Then you have your other ones that are going to be kind of more drag and drop or more template based, and that will allow you to get the writing and the actual meat of the portfolio out in a relatively quicker pace, give or take. And so I would recommend you kind of think about which category of those you want to be in, and go from there. Because even though if we think about your personal brand, there are still ways to do that on a template. Although I would encourage you, if you have the ability and the time and everything, to definitely go to the bucket of the more customizable. And so, it becomes a kind of question in that sense. But in terms of customizable, it's going to depend on your timing. There's Wix Editor or Editor X, they now call it, as well as there's WordPress. That's really the number one I feel like I hear of a lot, especially when it comes to customization. But I will say there is a very high learning curve. But it does come with their own university, as they like to call it, with tutorials. But I hope that helps. I would definitely think about it that way.
Yeah, and I also really like if you do want to learn a ton and basically make it very customizable. I love Webflow because that basically gives you total freedom, but it will take some time to learn, right? Because it's essentially what it is. It's like HTML and CSS, but in a graphical interface, right? In a way, but it's very flexible. So if you're like into that, if not, again, in my opinion, the platform is not the most important stuff. Basically, the key part is like your actual case studies and your structure and the story, etc. Right? So don't get too hung up on that part.
I agree 100%. Also, I saw that Josh just added Framer in the chat. I personally have not explored it that much, but that's another big one that I have been hearing and seeing a lot about. So that could be another good one. That's definitely more the customizable piece, like that
Yeah.
grouping.
Yeah, and I would also be curious, Annalise, if you want to mention in the chat, if you're like we mentioned Notion, and you mentioned it might be hurting your chances of getting hired. I think you noticed that too, Frankie. So
Mhm.
just let us know why you think that's the case,
Yeah, I'm
why
curious.
you think that. All right, so Philip is also asking, how do you navigate? And I'm not sure, Frank, if you can like answer this, but just maybe try to answer it to the best you can, because this is like a little bit more specialized. How do you navigate portfolios for more specialized UX design roles, like UX research or writing, etc.? Should those have basic UX design examples and specialized examples? Like, what's your take on that?
So I want to start with a caveat of saying that I've definitely leaned a bit more to the designer side of things. I've come from a graphic design background in school, so that's definitely where I kind of venture compared to like a heavy research role. And the reason I call this out is because I haven't spent the time to look into the heavy research or specialized ones. In that sense, mine's kind of taken a different turn with like UX and content creation. But the one thing I will say when it comes to more of like the research and kind of writing pieces is if that's really what you want to do, I think process is still a huge important piece. But I would recommend and make sure that you have more of kind of the data and more of the research pieces there as well. I think a lot of times with designers, they'll, you know, if when I say designers, I mean people who are going more so for the design side, more UI. Maybe I should be using that word to clarify here. Um, I think those ones are going to be more focused on kind of the overall process. They're more generalist. When it comes to research, you want to think more about, the key takeaways, the numbers, the statistics, and things like that. And so I would recommend like one thing that I've seen with some of the research ones that I've thought was interesting, was again, they were kind of generalist, but with a bit of more of research side. So I'm not sure, Philip, where exactly you're kind of leaning. But for someone who's generalist but leaning research, so that the case study didn't become overwhelming in length and become like almost too aggressive, what they ended up doing was they put like a nice like Goldilocks scenario kind of like sandwich, I guess you could say, for the deliverables. Um, but then they would link out and say, if you want to see more, here's the actual research. So then that way it kind of catered to both those sides. But I don't know, like I said, when I started, I'm not sure I'm the best person to answer that one, but I hope that helps a little bit, Philip. But yeah, that's my take on niche ones.
Yeah, yeah, that's good. And also, Philip, ideally, like if you have team projects, because that's often what employers are looking for, right? You can also highlight the roles, right? Basically, you can mention that, okay, this is a team project, and I focused on maybe if you're going for research, I focused on research more, right? And here, this is what my role was. So you can have the overall case study end to end, right? And cover, but you just basically mention in the beginning, like what your specific role was, and that usually looks quite effective. Um, all right, so Frankie, in your opinion, why do you think it's important to, one, research lots of others' portfolios before creating yours, and two, get plenty of feedback from UX industry professionals on your portfolio?
Sure, we'll start with number one. So number one, why should you do your research? Again, we're going to this theme of your case study, your portfolio is your big UX project. So just like any other project, you want to understand the market space. You want to understand your competitors, which feels a little weird to say in this context, but just roll with me on that. You basically want to see, what else is out there in the sense of who you're up against, but also from a UI standpoint and functionality standpoint of understanding what is working. You want to see if there's certain things that maybe every designer is possibly doing, and because probably there's a reason for it. And so you want to think about what are those pieces that you can take so that you're not copying first up, and that you're not also just, repeating what they're doing and just kind of falling in with the overall bunch of everyone else. But there's certain things that maybe, just work really well. And then you can take a take on it from yourself potentially later on. But I think in terms of the research, it's just a great way to see like what will work for you, and to understand really what's out there. And then in terms of question two about feedback. So feedback is important. Ultimately, it's all good and well. You can put stuff on a portfolio, you can love it, but maybe because you aren't the final user, you're not going to have the actual opinion, the right solution, let's say, that you want. So again, just like any project, you are not your final user, as we always say. You've probably heard that before. So, if you're designing for you, but your user is not you, that doesn't help you. So if you get feedback from individuals who have been in the hiring position, who are more senior than you, or maybe someone who's not actually that senior, but who just went through the hiring process, that'll also really help you. All of those people will have different insights, and give you different pieces of the story that you're going to need. So I would say is like definitely get feedback and definitely do it from a number of individuals and a number of different kind of skill levels. Because I think you're going to get different insights from all of them.
Yeah, yeah. And basically, one of the reasons I ask about that, right, is basically we see that as a big mistake, right, by a lot of people just not really doing enough research in terms of like, you don't need to reinvent the wheel too much, right? Or at least like before you innovate or before you like do everything that is different and unique and it's
Exactly.
amazing about you, do all the research, right? Look at the bunch of amazing portfolios, get some great samples of people who like, really excelled, right? And then synthesize all of that stuff and then create your own best version, right? Based on that and based on your own unique stuff, right? And again, industry feedback, crucial, right? Because you want to essentially get feedback from your users. So ideally hiring managers, but it can be senior UX folks, it can be just UX or product designers, researchers, etc. Right? So that's crucial as well. You can't believe like how many people I've seen who have not really gotten like lots of feedback, right? Because I know it's not easy, right? But you have to reach out to people and talk to them and ask them and etc. But it's very important, right? It's very important to do it many times, get many data points, and then iterate it. And this way, if you use both of these approaches, right, you'll actually get to like an awesome portfolio, right? So that's really crucial.
Can I add one more piece?
Yeah.
I'd even say like if you're in a boot camp or something like that, use your not coworkers, use your cohort members also as a way to, share out your portfolio and have them have some more eyes on it. Because again, like they're in the same process as you. They're understanding that research phase, they're understanding what's working, what's not. They may have spoken to someone else that you weren't able to. So, don't be afraid to use those individuals or Slack groups also like as a place to get more insights from.
Yeah, that's makes a lot of sense. All right, so I see Annalise provided some detail about her
Yes,
Notion
I see this.
risks. So I'm just gonna, she's basically saying it's all on one page. There is lots of sections and it takes a while to scroll through the page to see all of the content. So some of my sections include okay, this moved, include case studies, short videos explaining my project design decision, UX articles. I've written conceptual designs about me, resume, and contact me. I've been told it's hard to navigate since all of the content is on the same page. Also, my case studies are hosted on Figma that I linked on Notion, while you can scroll through a preview window of each case study on Notion. People don't necessarily realize it is scrollable, and they may have, well, sounds like you have a pretty good understanding why it can hurt you, and I agree that it probably will. Frankie, what do you think?
Yeah, like I said, I didn't know that much about it. I've seen like one or two on it, but yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the big things, and I guess I'll just call this out because I think you're mentioning it here. A little off topic there, but also still relevant here is the fact that on a case study, I would highly recommend you do not put an embedded Figma link. In terms of Notion, I'm not sure if this is, I think you can put videos into Notion. But the reason I bring this up is if you just put an embedded Figma link, that means that your user has to think. And the whole saying about UX is don't make me think. So, because ultimately what they have to do is they have to go in and interact and figure out, having no ideas how this product works, what is actually clickable, what are the pieces that are prototyped out. Whereas if you do 10 to 30-second video of you walking through the prototype, so showing your screen and you clicking through it, that's way more effective. Because what it's doing is I just have to click the video and sit back and watch, and I get to see the flow and see what you're trying to show me, but I don't have to guess my way through it. So maybe that's one way to get around kind of the Notion piece by embedding a video, so that you don't have to deal with kind of the back and forth of Figma and no accounts. But either way, I'd still recommend that whether you're using Notion or not. But it is interesting to think about. Appreciate the insights into why Notion is not working.
Awesome. All right, so that's great. So I see Tony also posted a question. So Tony, we'll come back to your question in a second. I think it's good. And Aurelia also, right, talking about like more senior folks improving their portfolios as well. Again, if others have questions, I'm sure you guys have tons of questions. Again, no question is stupid or anything like that, right? So please post those in Q&A tab. Please just make sure they're focused on portfolios, UX portfolios. So this way we keep this event focused on this particular topic. I also want to discuss case studies and projects in a little bit more detail. So what types of projects do you think are most effective in one's portfolio and why?
Most effective? Oh, my voice back there. Most effective is going to be real world projects. And the reason I sighed is because I know you're all going to push back on me and be like, well, how do I get these? Because I know it's a lot. There you go. Love it. Free promotion. Did not set him up. But basically my point being is that like, yes, they're the ideal instances because you get the real world experiences, because you get to work with stakeholders, you get to see how when it's not a, perfect day in the sense of everything's going to go perfectly, you don't deal with like the time constraints, you don't deal with kind of like the insights from the business side and things like that. So, those really would be the ideal state because they help you learn a lot of these skills that you're going to learn kind of on the job and not in maybe a boot camp or a program. Not to say that they're bad, but it's just the difference. But to the other side of it, like the fact that you won't be able to probably get them is the fact that, that doesn't mean that passion projects are bad. Passion projects are also really great. They're a great way to still learn your skills. They're a great way to focus on things that are of interest to you as well, which I think is also an important piece. And the reason I bring this up is the fact that one of the ways that you can kind of help yourself kind of break into a very, or not very, but a more niche area. So for example, if you are just starting out, but specifically you want to do UX within like the educational space, for example, picking something random. One of the things that you can do and why a passion project actually is helpful is you can go in and do a passion project related to that industry, because that way it can show the person who's, in the hiring seat, for one of those companies in the educational space, they'll be able to see that you actually have some insights into that space and that area. So it's a great way to kind of market yourself and help yourself figure out if you do have a plan of where you want to be. Or if you have a dream job, it's a great way to kind of do a project that's related to that company, or maybe one that's a different company in the same area. So kind of the differences there, they both have positives, they both have negatives. I would say if you can get, client projects of some sort, highly recommend it. One of the things that I did when I was first starting out was low pressure ones. I basically reached out to friends and family, and I basically just said, hey, look, like there's two buckets here. Number one being, does anyone have a company that they're just starting or know of someone who's starting a new company? If so, great. I can go make a website for them, go create a landing page for them. Great starting place, small project, little, not too high in the sense of maybe overwhelming in the pressure of it, because it's probably pretty low stakes because it's just going to be a relatively small landing page, but it's something. And then bucket number two is going to be someone who maybe has had a business for a very long time, has a website, but it's very outdated. And that's another great place to do a redesign project. Again, relatively lower stakes, but you can still get some of those real world insights, taking information from, learning from the client, dealing with their time constraints, figuring out how you can actually get into contact with these real users, figuring out maybe it's not as easy to get research put into the timelines, and things like that. So I would say if you can, try and go that route. And those are some easy tips to try and find some.
Yeah, those are great points. Thank you, Frank. Yeah, and I think this is like honestly like one of my favorite topics because this is like our bread and butter. This is basically like having case studies, real case studies, amazing portfolios from all those robust case studies. So what I wanted to add also, right, is once you have your first case study or maybe two case studies, right, there is honestly, in our opinion, right, because real projects make you much more hireable, much more marketable, right? Of course, we're like biased, but that's the whole reason we started the company, right, is to be able to provide that type of transition in a smoother way. right? But you can do something like that on your own too, right? You can essentially volunteer, find startups, find small businesses, and find nonprofits, etc., and basically just work with them, right? And that is usually going to be much more effective than just doing if you already. I mean, it's good to first start off like your first project's totally fine if it's hypothetical, right? And it's probably even better because you will not like annoy like some like real business because you're still like doing this like for the very first time. But then after that, right, or maybe after you do it a couple of times, makes total sense to just volunteer and basically find a company and do some work for them, right? Just also some tips. I actually even was thinking of doing a video on this. Maybe at some point we'll do like an event or maybe a video or something. With some tips to ensure that those projects are effective, right? So ideally, right, you can also, in addition to nonprofits or small businesses or local businesses, right, you can just go to like accelerators, incubators, and find startups, right? Because here's the thing, digital products, right, like digital tech products, typically make much better case studies, much more interactive, and they're dynamic, and there's more flow, more interactivity, right? So ideally, that would be the best, right? Of course, if you don't have access to that, so not just information site, right, or like not just a website with information display, but something like a mobile app or web app or basically some type of software, right? You want to cover multiple phases. Ideally, you want to have a team also, right? So because that's crucial to demonstrate to employers. Ideally, get a mentor also, right? Because this way you will save a ton of time and you'll get through that faster. And yeah, I have like a whole list of actual points and notes here, so I'm not going to spend lots of time on that. But make sure you have implementation intention, right? So basically, when you work with those companies, basically try to have access to the actual decision makers and stakeholders, right? And ensure that they actually really want to get this done, right? It's not just they just, yeah, do whatever, with our site or with our app, which, I mean, like basically you want them to care and you want them in an ideal setting, right? You're not always going to get there because sometimes it can be hard to get. But you want them to be involved and basically really want to get that implemented, right? Because in that case, if it is implemented, right, so then you can show the results, you can show the impact, which is crucial for effective case studies, right? And also try to make sure you can actually showcase it in your portfolio. The mistake that I've seen so many times is just, or like people ask about this all the time, is basically just volunteering, right, to doing some work and not talking about NDAs in the beginning, not talking about all that stuff, and then realizing, oh, I cannot actually showcase it. So like, what was the point? I mean, it's still like you're going to learn a lot, so you're going to learn a ton, but basically very important to discuss that ideally in the beginning and then plan and structure the project. So it's basically much more effective case study. And feel free again. I see some additional questions show up here, which is awesome. So yeah, feel free to post more of those in Q&A tab. We'll try to address as many of them as possible because this is all about you guys. So we want to basically make this as valuable as possible for you. All right, so coming back to Tonia's question, right? So switching gears a little bit. So it's a little bit specific, right? So she was asking any tips and structure in portfolio if one has years of graphic design. And I think I really love this question because lots of people transitioning from graphic design and from like other areas of design into UX, right? So if one has years of graphic design and maybe some coding or software development experience outside of UX working experience, I've noticed some recent job postings mention coding languages also. So I thought that might be useful on my portfolio, or is that potentially doing too much? So I know it's very specific, so obviously we cannot like spend lots of time on this, but Frankie, any tips on structuring that type of portfolio?
Yeah, a couple of things I want to start with. One is, yeah, a lot of jobs are now asking for coding. That's a whole nother discussion for a different day. I do think that, I'll start there for 2 seconds in that sense of, I think that learning high level coding is great in the sense of being able to have conversations with your engineering partners. But I think from the standpoint of a UX designer, like you shouldn't be in the code. That's left and right brains both working at once, and that's just not feasible. So, thinking about it from that standpoint is really just the hiring managers don't know what they're putting there. It's really more so, I think, in my opinion. But in the sense, going back to more so the question and kind of going back to the portfolio piece here, is the fact of how do you handle these other design experiences? And I mean, I'm curious, Michael, what you think, but in my opinion, I think it's good to keep it. But I think what I was saying before is relevant here, that I think that there's a difference between saying you're a graph designer, UX designer, or this or that, and everything as kind of your role, versus showing that you're mainly a UX designer now and showing bits and pieces and pulling those past experiences into the new role of a UX designer. And what I mean by this is that I've definitely seen some portfolios where the title would be, I'm a UX. It's like it moves. It's like I'm a UX designer, I'm a web developer, I'm a graph designer. And personally, I think that's doing too much. I think if you're marking yourself as, 3 to 4 jobs, that's not going to help you, because then ultimately, what are you good at? There's differences between each of those. And so I think at that point, the hiring manager is going to be like, you're probably not good at all of them. It's just not realistic. You're human. Um, and so in that sense, I think it does hurt. But the other piece of it, and where I think it is good, is that I think for, let's say in this example, you use graph design. So I think it can be helpful in the project section to split out the different projects. So I think at the top, and this is important, it should be at the top. You should have your UX work. That should be the sole focus. And then either at the bottom of it or in a different tab that's later on in the hierarchy of your navigation, you can have a tab for your graph design work. This way, what you're doing is you're still showing it and it's still there if someone wants to see it, but it's not the focal point. The focal point instead is that you're a UX designer and this is what you want to do and what you're working on. But it's if they want to see kind of how you got to other pieces or more about you, then it's also there. You're not hiding it. But that's how I would do it. Is I think it's a way of, you know, um, calling out and kind of highlighting what you are now and not everything. I think that's the big difference.
Yeah, those are great points, and I completely agree. I think it's the mistake that a lot of people make, especially coming from like more graphic design background, is just mixing it all together, and
Yeah,
then leaving employer basically to figure it out, like what it is that they actually do. So you still need a UX oriented portfolio, you still need UX oriented case studies, even though, yeah, let's be fair, those coming from design backgrounds or especially from graphic design backgrounds, usually it's a little bit faster and like easy. It's like not easy, but it's like easier transition usually. Because you've already done like quite a bit of related types of activities and tasks. But that doesn't mean you can just get away by just showing that, right? So you actually still need UX case studies, and yeah, make it very clear, very clean, right? So don't make it all like a pile of stuff of like all your work, so it's confusing.
exactly. Because
Um,
at the end of the day, if we go back to it again, like we're designing for our end user. Our end user is someone who is a hiring manager. They don't have time. They don't want to decipher through this. They don't want to think. They're doing this all day, every day, looking through hundreds of these. So if you want to increase your chance, what you want to do is put it on a platter for them, make it easy. So definitely don't hide it in terms of the UX work and like pile it all together. But I don't think it will hurt you by keeping some of it there.
Awesome. All right. So coming back to case studies. So I know, Frank, you mentioned that real world case studies basically are typically stronger. And I know you mentioned a couple of reasons. Do you want to just go a little bit deeper on that and just let everyone know, like, and clarify why you think it's important to have those real client case studies and like, what's the difference?
Sure. I think one of the biggest differences with real life case studies versus more so of a kind of fake project is that you'll be working with someone else. And the reason I say this is even in a fake project, you can be working with other designers. When I say someone else, I mean other product members. So I'm talking whether it will depend on every, client project and whatnot, but you'll be working with a client. So you'll be working with someone who's more of a stakeholder role, as well as you might be working more so with some engineers, because if there's a client, you're probably building something out. So it allows you to have more full-blown understandings of how a product team works and how to interconnect and collaborate with these other disciplines. And so that's a super helpful piece. Another one is, thinking about some of the pieces that are going to come up when you're dealing with clients. So, you're not just designing for yourself anymore and what you think the user would want. There's going to be instances where the client may change their mind. There may be times where all of a sudden your timelines change. You're not working in a blue sky day. You're not dealing with an everyday perfect scenario. There's going to be pieces that are going to come in. And so I think that that's really the big piece there, and why it's so different is that like you really see what it's like to work at a company and in the real world. because it allows you to really gain all those extra pieces that you're not going to get from, a passion or a fake project.
Okay, okay, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I think so to kind of a follow-up question from Annalise here. Um, and Annalise, I think I've covered a little bit of that earlier. So since we're talking about these real-world projects, right? So she's asking what types of real-world projects are most effective to include in your portfolio. I've been told projects working on landing pages are not attractive to hiring managers because UI/UX designers typically work on products, websites, and apps, not landing or marketing pages.
I will definitely agree with when Annalise is saying what you said earlier. I do agree that I think you are able to show more of your skill sets, and you have a higher, I hate to say it, but like kind of a higher weighted project, if it is more of an app or a software related thing than a landing page. But at the end of the day, I think, take what you can get. Because I know how hard it can be to get real world projects. So like if you're deciding between a real world landing page project and a fake project, I would still go with the landing page one personally, in my opinion. Because you're still going to be able to work with the client, with the engineers potentially, and gain more of those insights. And I think that's really what's more important there. And that's what you should be selling in the case study story rather than, oh, it was just a boring landing page. And so I think that's really what it comes down to is like thinking about what the takeaways are more than anything and why those are more important.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I completely agree. And yeah, and that's why, and at least I'm also agreeing with what you're saying as well. Because landing pages, and one of the reasons they're probably less attractive is one, there's less interactivity, it's just more information display. It's more of a marketing task and sales task, to be honest, rather than design, right? So it's, yes, designers come in and design can help, but it's crucial to structure information in the right way, to do copywriting properly, so it's more about sales and influence, right? And it's not about really like interactivity and user flows and basic interactions, etc. And that's why it's key. And ideally, you want to get projects that are dynamic, interactive products, right? So tech products, and basically something like, just collaborate with some startup, or so it's some type of software. It doesn't have to be mobile. It can be a web app, it can be some other type of app, some other, like one of the new interfaces, like voice even, right? Especially if you want to do that later, right? Maybe even AI projects, right? There's going to be, based on research and predictions, lots of AI projects coming in, right? Of course, you cannot predict the future, but that's what is, I know like Jacob Nielsen writes quite a bit about that. There's like lots of great articles on that in terms of like the future and how UX and AI are going to play out, and how AI is almost like a new interface in a way that will need a lot of UX work, right? Because so far today, it's the interface is well, not the best, and a lot of people cannot really use it effectively. So yeah, basically try to get a software type of project, app, mobile, web, with the team, ideally with a mentor, no NDA, or no, NDA is okay, but as long as it doesn't prevent you from showcasing the work in your portfolio. NDAs are common, but just make sure that the NDA doesn't say, you cannot show any of this in your portfolio. So you just, unless they're paying you a ton of money, right? And you just want to make the money and not care about the case study. So basically it's key to figure out, are you learning or are you earning, right? So if you're learning and building yourself up, it's crucial to have those great, strong case studies, right? And it's even much better to volunteer, do pro bono work, as long as it gives you those great case studies, and you can build yourself up, right? And basically become a better candidate, right? Once you're there, then, it doesn't matter as much probably, right? Then you can, then you're earning, right? So it's, then it makes more sense. So hopefully that makes sense. Frankie, and we'll have to wrap up in a few minutes, but I do want to like address a couple of more quick questions, and then maybe take a couple more from the audience as well. In your opinion, what are the, again, coming back to mistakes, since this is like our theme for today, what are some of the top mistakes, not just with regards to the overall portfolio, but specifically related to case studies that we haven't covered yet?
I think we covered a lot of them.
Yeah,
I feel like a lot of what I was talking about was like mostly for the case study piece as well. It was like some of the landing page, the home pages pieces, but a lot of the meat and bones of it, I feel like was for the case study. But I mean, I think case study specifically that's where the length comes in. That's where the checklist comes in. We're just kind of going back to what we've been talking about. That's where I guess you started talking about this actually a little bit before, and I don't think I hinted, I don't think I talked about it enough before. But one of the things that I think, I guess there's two pieces actually I can add to this, is from the case study perspective. One is the one you were talking about before, which is what it was your role in the project. I think that gets overlooked a lot for some reason. I think especially if you were on a team, and again, whether this is client-based, school-based, passion project-based, doesn't matter. Either way, if you've worked with other individuals on this project, I think it's super important to make it very clear what you did in this in this role. What did you specifically work on as the UX designer on this project? I think that's super important because it shows your different skill sets. So I think, you don't want to go out. It's like a weird balance of, you don't want to be like, oh, I didn't do this, I did this bit. But I think it's important if there was something that you really, really worked on, or that you worked on that was really, really important, like make it known that that was part that you did. And maybe that may go more for like the interview piece than kind of the portfolio. But I think just making it clear, like what your specific focus for that project was, I think is important. And then the other piece is, oh, did I forget it? The other piece is roles. The question was mistakes on portfolios, on the case studies. Other one, oh, I'm not, this is a different one. I forgot what I was going to say. But the other one is thinking about, again, the length and the way you move through a project. But this way, and one thing I want to bring up is the concept of anchoring. So a lot of these website hosts will allow you to create an anchor system onto your project or your page. And what this basically is they can look different, but usually it'll be like the dots on the side of the page, and it'll be like design, or it'll be research, design, final solution, something like that. And I think that's a really important mistake. That's not a mistake in the sense that it's not utilized enough. That you're helping your user move through the flow, so that if someone's more focused on the final solution, they can jump right down to it because they can click that little word on the side and it will anchor them down to the bottom of the page. And it helps them navigate through it better. So I think that's another one that, like, definitely try and use those. It really helps, whether it's on the side, whether it's the top of kind of the main section, the bulk of the work, however you want to design it, go for it. But I'd say that's another mistake, is just not utilizing that tool.
Awesome, awesome. Frankie, that's great. I love that you, even though I keep asking, come from different angles, you still have answers to all these questions. That's good. Very insightful.
And then too much time on portfolios, I think, is what it comes down to.
Yes, I want to ask you probably one more question from my side, and then take maybe a couple or so from the audience, and then we can also, as promised before, we'll make the special announcement, tell you about the program that we're running, because it may be a great opportunity for some of you, and also tell you about basically the next steps and etc. One question is we get basically all the time, right, in portfolio events is how many case studies do you think one needs to get a job? And I'll let you first answer it, and then I can add on.
I've heard this question plenty of times. Again, it's not one word answer. It's not you do this and you get a job. I just have to clarify that. I mean, I'd like to hope that that's understood. But I think that, I like to say 3 to 4, I think, is a good number. Because again, we're going back, I'm repeating myself and I apologize, but it's the theme of the night of, we want to design for our user. We want to help them as the designer on our portfolio. And so our hiring managers, our recruiters, they don't have the time. They don't want to spend the time seeing a page long of different projects and then have to waste more time within that minute to figure out which project do they want to see. So if you do 3 to 4, it gives them enough of a variety to see which one maybe is more relevant to the industry that they work in. Maybe one's more relevant to the product that they work on. Maybe some are mobile, some are web, maybe some are Apple Watch or something like that, if you have that ability. So, I would definitely try and do 3 to 4. It's a good average. It's a good kind of variety that gives you just enough that's not overwhelming, but gives you the option to pick and choose what you want to see.
Exactly. Yeah. That's usually the magic. 3 is usually the magic number. But also keep in mind that not all case studies are equal, right? It's like if you have 3 passion projects that you did for a week each, right? It's not going to probably be enough, right? Or if you maybe have 3 jobs and you worked at each one for a year, right? So that's going to be pretty different, right? So we usually recommend having at least 3 and having them run for at least like a couple of months in duration or so, approximately, right? Maybe 2 to 3 months or so, if it's like with a client, for example, right? And if you're doing it part-time, it's okay. That way, it will basically be sizable and big enough, but it will also look great on your resume and your LinkedIn. Basically, you don't want to have just like 1 week project, 1 week project, 1 week project, right? Because that's not going to be sufficient for your resume and for your LinkedIn, right? So you want to have something a little longer, right? So it looks better. So I know Aurelia also asked a question about more senior folks transition. I think Aurelia, so we probably have covered like lots of things that would probably be applicable. So let me just read the question. I just realized this talk was for people transitioning to UX. For those of us in more senior level, if there is time, can you please speak about what sets apart the portfolio for mid-senior level UX? So I think we've already covered a lot of it, right? Because a lot of it would be applicable. But Frankie, do you want to add anything else you think that maybe we didn't cover that would be unique, more unique to more senior folks?
I don't know if it's necessarily unique. I think it still relates to what we've been saying, but I think one of the more important, I think even more so, I should say, when you're more of a senior and mid-level, I think the story and the narrative is even higher rated, I guess, and expected. And so less of the checklist. And more of the narrative, the story, and the engaging piece, I think is even more expected than when it's a junior. It's like this will help you, if that makes sense. I also think that being able to share kind of like more of your story is even more important for a junior and a senior. So the reason I say this is like, since I've kind of progressed in my career, I've revamped my portfolio. I don't want to think about how many times. But the reason I bring that up is like, I definitely started out as I'm kind of a generalist. Here's me. I'm one of the bunch. And tried to figure out how I was unique. Where now that I've been able to, be in the industry for some time and kind of figure out like what my niche is personally, I was able to go back in and update my branding so that I was more of that kind of overall who I want to kind of target myself as. So now my portfolio, and this may be different for you. For me, it's more of I'm a UX designer and I'm a content creator. So it's a bit more of like a selling piece as well of trying to get more of those other sides of it as well, rather than here's just my case studies. And so I think as you, progress and become more senior, it's more about kind of what are you selling yourself as? In the sense of what are those other pieces right now that you've gotten into the industry and now that you're actually in that job? What else do you do and how can you add that back into your portfolio? I hope that helps you.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you, Frankie. So Aurelia, I hope that's, that's helpful. No, I love Monique's question here also. Can using previous non-design experience be converted into a case study? What are your
Great
thoughts,
question.
Frankie?
Yeah, I don't see why not. I mean, I'm trying to think of an example in my head of this. I feel like it's hard for me because like I expect like I come from graphic design, so like it's kind of like similar in that sense, but like I guess in that case, yes. But I don't see why not. I feel like I've definitely seen, for me personally, the case studies that are the most the ones where I see the person the most engaged, the one who's presenting it, are the ones where they're actually super passionate about it. So the reason I bring this up now is I think it relates to Monique's question of the fact of like, if that was something you used to be passionate about and something you actually really enjoyed as well, like try and bring it in because that'll show through in the interviews. And so if you can try and like do a whole case study on it, if there was a product you used to work on, but you were maybe on the sales side, but you want to think through it from a UX side, like I don't see why not. The one caveat I would say, oh, that's what I was going to say before. It all comes full circle. The one caveat that I would say though is like, if you are going to do it, let's say my example of the sales person, if you used to be in sales and you used to work on project XYZ and you want to do a case study on kind of the information architecture of it, or maybe the overall experience of it, please do yourself a favor and make it very, very clear on the projects page as well as the case study page itself that this is, exploratory, that this is, a passion project and unrelated to that client. Too often I've seen people try and pass that by. I've seen many Netflix ones where they do not actually work for Netflix and never have, like they never did. And so, it kind of catches people up. And so I think making sure that you call it out that it was like a school project in that sense, I think that's really fine, but just make it clear.
Yeah, and there are probably those fake Netflix projects, right? Than real Netflix ones in the portfolio. And Monique, also to add to that, I've also seen this with researchers, right? Because research may have done different type of research or like related, but not with the digital product. So it's kind of like both, right? On one hand, yes, you can. And yes, it's going to be helpful, and yes, it's transferable skills potentially, right? And it's going to give you an edge potentially, but by itself, it's typically not enough. You still want, even if you're a researcher, most researchers still need to work on if you want to work in UX, right, and do digital products, you need to have digital products case studies to actually get there. Typically, there are some exceptions sometimes, but it's not like it's an exception, not the rule. So you do want to have digital product type of experience as well. And you don't want to confuse anyone and basically try to, oh, maybe this is industrial design, maybe this is graphic design, maybe this is, right? You basically, your background, if it's going to help you, right? If you can pull out all these transferable skills and experience with different types of tasks and activities, but it's not, you still need UX case studies. You still need digital type of product case studies, right? So basically, that's still important, right? So keep that in mind. And coming back to NDA, so Jinky is asking if we're under NDA, how are we able to showcase it? I have good projects that were internal, but were very cool projects. So, Frank, I know this is you're probably not like a lawyer, but any
No, I am
tips?
not. I'm a designer through and through.
Any tips?
It's a tough one. I think you'll get different opinions out there. There's some people who are the opinion of, as long as you kind of remove the branding, the coloring, anything that's going to make it very obvious that it's from that company, then you're fine. Other times I've heard it where put it under password on your portfolio and only the people with the password, then it's fine. I've also heard it where you don't even do it. So I don't know. Personally, I don't know. I don't do it. I don't think it's not worth it for me personally. I'd rather, play it safe. But, those are the different pieces that I've heard and I've had many discussions on. But I think it's a tough one. It's a taboo topic.
Yeah, yeah, lots of people have this question all the time because and it's more, basically it's fine if you're like already in the field, if you're more senior, if you have that situation, right? It's more okay. I think where it's hurting people the most probably is people transitioning, right? And basically maybe volunteering, doing pro bono work, and then realizing that, because that's like really when it kind of hurts and presents an issue. In those cases, I would try to just talk to them and to the business or whatever, and maybe try to like sanitize it, right? So essentially, if that's a concern, in the first place, you want to prevent it, right? You just want to discuss with them in advance, and if you want to do volunteer or pro bono work, if that's the case, you just don't do it. Go with another one. But if it is the case, then maybe sanitize it, maybe do like basically what Frankie just said.
I
Okay,
would agree. I would say, sorry. I would
yeah,
say like, definitely have a conversation about it. Like I've learned more recently that like sometimes when I thought things were under NDA, it was just they were only under NDA until certain times of like period of time. So that maybe there's also like you can make it in the moment before you forget it all, and then don't go live until X date has passed. And so I'd also say like, don't be afraid to bring it up and ask and see if maybe there's even some negotiating that can happen there, to your point, Michael, of like, maybe once it's live, usually a lot of times people are like, oh, it's live, you're good. And so, don't be afraid, and just kind of see it, negotiate and explain why you want to do it. I think if you explain the whys, that also sometimes may help.
yeah. And by the way, if you guys want more information about case studies and how to make them strong and how to build your experience, etc., I think we did a whole event. That recording should be on the site, I believe, as well. Mika, maybe if you can find it, feel free to paste it in the chat. We did like a whole panel event with a few folks, and where we discussed that particular topic, specifically focused on case studies and projects, how to get them, etc., and how to ensure it's strong. So if you want to dig in more into that. So last question. So analyst was also asking, would you make a case study on a hackathon project?
I don't see why not. I think really what it comes down to is whether it's hackathon, passion, client, whatever it really comes down to is what are you trying to showcase from a skill level standpoint? Is it something that's going to help you sell the way you think, the way that you created something? Is it going to help you show that maybe it's the first time you worked with engineers? Maybe it's the first time you worked with other designers. I don't know, fill in the blanks. But if it's something that's going to showcase a new skill that you think is important and that you haven't been able to, then I would say go for it. I think hackathons are great. I think they're great experiences because of that collaborative piece. And so I would say, why not? But again, like make it clear that this was a passion project, that you did this in a hackathon, call it out. But I wouldn't go against it. I think it can help you.
Yeah, yeah, and especially if you've already done it, right? It's amazing for practicing your team collaboration skills. It's amazing for building skills, right? If you're planning to attend lots of hackathons to build case studies, probably not the best strategy because it's typically short, right? It's typically, so it's not going to be like very sizable. If you've already done it, why not, right? It's definitely, and it's an amazing way to build up your skills, to practice, to build like hard skills, soft skills, also like team collaboration, etc. So it's yeah, it just basically would not make the strongest case studies because it's not really like robust unless the hackathon lasted for a few months, which is usually not the case, but there are some, that's all right. So we're out of time, so we're going to be wrapping up. So Frankie, thank you so much. This was awesome. Really appreciate you staying for longer than having this like deeper discussion. We try to ensure all of our events are like deep and insightful, right? So it's not just like a 20-minute thing, but we explore the topic in depth. So I hope you guys enjoyed the events and got some great insights. So as promised, people often ask about our program, right? So as promised earlier, let me also tell you about the program that we're running, since it may be a great opportunity for some of you to not just build a very strong real client portfolio and real experience, but also get the crucial career preparation to master UX job search and interviewing so you can actually land that first UX role. Right, so who the program is best for? The program is the best fit for ambitious people who know UX basics or come from a design, research, creative tech, or related background and look to transition into UX in one of the most effective and efficient ways and without quitting their current jobs or other commitments, right? So we're also quite selective, so and look for motivated and committed team players. So what's BeginX? It's a part-time UX career accelerator with real mission-driven client projects designed to help people transition into UX. We ran many cohorts so far, helped about 160 people transition into UX. Alumni of the program have been hired by companies like SiriusXM, Coach, Google, ABC News, Meta, many others. So the program was ranked by SwitchUp as a best UX program and also featured in Fortune magazine and ADP list. The advisors and mentors are also UX practitioners from also companies like Google, IDEO, Amex, The Economist, many others. What you gain after completing the program is build not just the hard skills, but the critical soft skills. Real experience with a robust portfolio, you expand your professional network and master UX job search and interviewing so you can actually land a job. In fact, our grads have done so well that we offer the money-back guarantee. So basically, you either land a UX job or you get your tuition back, plus an extra $300 on top of that. So if it sounds like you may be a good candidate, you can learn more on beginx.com, and Mika is actually going to paste a link as well. The next cohort starts at the end of May 29th. And our cohorts are quite small and do fill up pretty quickly, so they're capped to 12 people only. So if you feel like it's a fit, please act soon. Also, to thank everyone in our community who attended this event, you'll be eligible for a $500 tuition credit if accepted. To claim that credit, what you need to do is just by tomorrow, so by Friday, just go to the website, you'll see the link in the chat, and request a free, no commitment career transition consultation. Or you can also just request program info or just apply. And by the way, just to clarify, right, so our consultations are designed to not just be some quick program pitch, right? So, but actually provide you with an opportunity to learn about UX career transition best practices and pitfalls to avoid, get some guidance and personalized advice, and ask questions about your own UX career switch. So then there is no commitment, right? So basically, and then also figure out how the program could help you and see if you may be a good fit, right? So. In addition to telling you about the program, I also wanted to mention that we frequently run different types of virtual events. So we'll keep you updated about upcoming events and share resources via our newsletter. That is usually sent every few weeks or so. thank you so much for joining us tonight. And thank you to our wonderful guest speaker for taking her time to join us and provide all the valuable insights. It was a huge pleasure to have you on. And by the way, Frankie, what is if anyone wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way for folks who want to connect with you?
First off, thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun. Best way to connect with me is LinkedIn or Instagram. I can throw them in the chat if that's easier. LinkedIn is just my full name, Frankie Kastenbaum. Instagram, getting ahead of myself, is UX by Frankie. I will quickly try and drop both of those into the chat.
Yeah, what I'll do, Frank, is drop it into the chat. I'll keep this once we wrap up. I'll keep the event open, right? So you guys, if anyone's catching up, right, so you guys can basically copy that information.
Perfect. It's the same ones that were on the slides before, so nothing that new, but I will put them in for easy access. Apologies for not doing that earlier.
Yeah,
But
no worries. And as I mentioned, Frankie runs a newsletter on LinkedIn.
Yeah, I can drop that in as well.
Yeah, so basically, I highly recommend that. And Frankie, it's specifically focused on folks helping people transition into the field, right?
Yeah, so all of the content that I do is specific to individuals breaking into the industry. It's always from the mindset of me thinking about kind of like what I wish I knew when I was in your shoes. So all of it is similar ideas, similar themes, each from a slightly different perspective. And so yes, it's all for all of you. I'm trying to find the link to it as I speak. It's Frankly UX. I had fun with the name. But yeah, it's always there's a lot of stuff on portfolios. There's a lot of stuff on books and resources that I recommend. So highly recommend you also take a look. I just put it in the chat.
Awesome. All right. So once again, Frankie, thank you so much. And thank you guys for joining us. It was always great to have you here. And we'll look forward to seeing you at our future events.
Thanks, everyone. Loved all the
Cheers.
questions.